Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, the podcast that is dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha, and I am a forensic scientist and a criminologist, and in each episode we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories that are often left behind. This is not just about true crime. It's about the truth, it's about accountability, and it's about giving a voice to those who deserve to be heard. Thank you so much for being here. Let's jump right in. Hi guys, and welcome back. Thank you for being here, and thank you again for being so patient. If you are on our social media, particularly our Facebook, you will have seen my post about why I have been a little bit behind this week, and it's for the worst of the worst reasons. My youngest son, who is 7, he had a really horrible incident on Monday morning. We hadn't even got to school yet. So around 7:30 a.m. I had him and his older brother and we were rushing down to hospital. And from there we were transferred to a different hospital, Perth Children's Hospital. And he underwent plastic surgery and he's doing well. We're back home. He's doing well now that we're home. He's actually really struggling to sit still. But it was the worst day of my life, hands down, without going into too much detail. And it's going to be a bit of a road of recovery, but I just wanted to let you guys know why Tuesday's podcast didn't come out. And we had, of course, intended to release a guest episode this week, which I'm hoping to do over the weekend. But everything's running behind, understandably, because I just didn't even look at my phones, to be honest, or my laptop or anything like that. So thank you again for being patient. Now, our last episode, Enough of Me, was about Gus Lamont, and I was, on the fence about doing that because it's still relatively active, and we got some really good feedback. I did ask you guys if you would like a part 2, and there's a lot of requests for that, so I am already working on it. Today's episode obviously is a audio podcast only and no video. Apologies to those who prefer the video, but I am in no way presentable. I am literally, I think since Monday I have slept 6 hours, so it's currently Thursday, so I look as though I sound, put it that way. I also want to quickly mention that if you jump on any of our pages or our website, which is www.exhumingthetruth.org, you will see a GoFundMe link that is for us to raise money to get myself and one other member to Queensland to assist in the search for Jack McLennan. I'm assuming the wider community knows a lot about Jack's case and has listened to, if not our episodes for Jack, Graham Crowley's episodes. I know that ABC have picked up Jack's case, which is fantastic, and they're going to be reporting as well. It's just really important to us that we get our boots on the ground essentially and use all of our resources to try and help Kelly and the family. I will try and post that link in the podcast notes. Otherwise, I will do a separate post for it if you're interested. I am basically saying if you have the means to, it would be great to donate the amount you would spend on a coffee. But of course, if you do not have the means, if you're able to share or just have a chat about it, that would be fantastic. Anyway, today's episode is called No Justice for Isla Bell, and I want to get right into it because I've got opinions. And my opinion segment's not till the end because we have a bit of detail to go through. So let's do it. No Justice for Isla Bell. Listener discretion warning. This episode discusses a lot of violence, including death, decomposition, drug use, and themes that might be distressing to some listeners. So listener discretion is especially advised for today's episode. Today's episode is one that has shocked and devastated people right across Australia, and it is the case of 19-year-old Isla Bell. Now, Isla was a young woman from Melbourne who disappeared in October of 2024, and that was before her remains were tragically discovered only weeks later, and they were at a rubbish facility in Victoria. And sadly, this story doesn't actually end here with the discovery of her remains, because in May 2026, like right now, prosecutors actually dropped all homicide charges against the man accused of killing her. Now, for many people following this case along from day one, this announcement felt impossible to understand. It certainly irritated me, as I've, been following it too, and I'm going to get you up to speed and we can have a chat about it. Essentially, we're asking, how on earth could a young woman allegedly end up dead inside an apartment, allegedly concealed in a fridge, allegedly transported across Melbourne, and later found at a rubbish tip, yet no murder or manslaughter prosecution proceeds? Now, today we're going to walk through this case, and we're going to do it chronologically so it makes sense. We're going to examine the forensic and legal challenges, and let me tell you, they're both in abundance. And we're also going to discuss the hugely uncomfortable reality that, when we have suspicion, and not just suspicion, but we have proof, we have semi-admissions to certain things, enough admission and enough evidence to have a confident inference, which is not the same as proof in a criminal court. And we're going to talk about that. And there's so many components to this case with the evidence and the limitations and the thresholds and the devastating space that can actually exist between public belief and what prosecutors believe that they can actually prove beyond reasonable doubt. Now, we're going to start with who Isla Bell is. And, we might interchange between is and was, but essentially this is the person that she was, but the person that she always will be. And I want to highlight that because nobody can take that away from her, even in death. So she was 19 years old and from Brunswick in Melbourne. Now, her friends and her loved ones described her as compassionate, intelligent, creative, and deeply loved. And she actually had, in reports I read, she dreamt of becoming a marine biologist, which is super cool. Now, her disappearance rapidly gained media attention all across Victoria, and her family made a lot of public appeals for information because they were getting really concerned for her safety as time went on. And like many missing persons cases, the early days were filled with a lot of uncertainty, and then comes, the speculation, the rumours, the fear, and, just the desperation for hope that she would still be found alive. But instead, investigators actually eventually began piecing together a timeline pointing toward an extraordinary, disturbing outcome. And with that, we'll jump into the timeline. I have tried to keep it as concise as possible so that, you can get up to speed and understand enough to be able to discuss the current events this month in 2026 in this case. Now, according to police allegations and court documents, you're going to hear me say alleged, allegedly, blah, 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 like I always do. That's because this is still not a solved case. We have to speak that way. It does not mean I agree or disagree, that someone has or has not done that. It is literally a safeguard for the case. Now, according to police and court documents, Isla had entered the apartment of a 53-year-old man, in St Kilda. Now, let me look up how to say this before I go on and just embarrass myself. This is so funny because I literally had to Google how to pronounce it so I don't shame myself and everybody else. Now, this man was 53 years old and he lived in St Kilda, like I just said. Now, his first name is Marat, M-A-R-A-T, and his surname is Garniev, which is G-A-N-I-E-V, and he is from Russia, if you cannot tell by that name. So I'm just going to refer to him as Marat because that is easier for me to say and remember. So let's go back. So it's October the 5th, 2024, and Isla is allegedly seen entering Marat's apartment in St Kilda, and he's 53 and she's 19, okay? And the police allege in these documents that the two of them had actually met less than 48 hours earlier. And then in this report, the investigators go on to allege that Isla actually never left the apartment or never left it alive. So there's footage by way of CCTV of her entering the apartment and none of her exiting the apartment. Now, court documents tendered in Melbourne Magistrates Court also allege that CCTV footage captured when investigators believed was a violent altercation through the kitchen window of Murat's apartment shortly before 1 a.m. on October 7th, 2024. So she enters on the 5th, and then come 2 days later, around 1 a.m., it's caught on CCTV that Murat is allegedly physically assaulting Isla. Now, according to police allegations, again, this same footage appeared to show Isla's head, and I quote, thrashing around before she allegedly fell to the ground while Murat appeared to strike her. Police further allege that this same footage also shows Isla then attempting to raise her head before it was allegedly pushed back down. I'm so sorry to go off topic really quick, but just in case you feel like I'm not paying attention, which I completely am, because I worked really hard on this episode and I've been following this for so long, I am also getting up and down to help my son. My oldest son is acting as his nurse while I'm working and coming to get me as he needs me. So it might seem like, I'm stopping and starting because I am, because I'm also mum, doctor / nurse. So I'm really sorry. This is the only episode. I'm hoping that might cut in and out like that, but I'll try and make it as fluent as possible with the very little technology knowledge that I have. So let's get back into it now. So they've got this CCTV footage. I don't know exactly where this footage was, whether it was his or someone else's. I'm assuming it's someone else's because he wouldn't want to implicate himself, Murat, that's who I'm talking about. And because it's an apartment complex, there may have been lots of CCTV footage available. Anyway, so what was I saying? She attempted to raise her head, right, after she'd been allegedly struck down. And then he allegedly pushes her back down. And this was the very last confirmed sighting of Isla Bell alive. Oh, God, this makes my blood boil. I can't wait to talk to you about how I feel about this and why these things are so important. Police documents then go on to allege more about the CCTV, which later captures Murat extensively cleaning the apartment in the days following the alleged assault. Now, investigators say that Isla's phone was never switched on again after 1:50 p.m. on October the 7th, and her bank accounts had not been accessed reportedly since October the 4th. Now, roughly 1 hour before this alleged assault caught on CCTV, Isla had reportedly messaged a friend on Snapchat. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what the message said until a bit later because that's a whole other discussion. But she basically had messaged her friend saying that she had found this Russian man and he was buying her gifts and things like that. So she basically is confirming that she was in this apartment that she was seen entering. Now, police later alleged that Isla died inside this apartment sometime during the early hours of October the 7th, and that exact mechanism of death would become one of the most significant forensic and legal issues in this entire case, which we'll come back to. But next we have these allegations of a fridge and the discovery of Isla's remains. Now, in these documents, police allege that Isla's body was concealed inside a fridge after her death. Now, they further allege that there's another man involved, and his name, sorry, I had to look up on Translator how to say it again. His name is Eyal Yaffe. His first name is Eyal. Eyal? I think that's how you say it. And his surname is Yaffe, Yaffe. We'll just call him Eyal. Now, this second man is 59 years old. And in these documents, they've alleged that 59-year-old Eyal has assisted Murat in moving and disposing of this fridge that they allege contains Isla around Melbourne numerous times before it's eventually entered into the waste system. Now, according to these police allegations as well, Murat initially denied any knowledge of this fridge at all before later actually allegedly admitting that he transported Isla's remains after she died in his apartment while continuing to deny responsibility for her death itself. Pardon? Now, weeks later, in November 2024, some human remains were actually discovered at a waste facility in Dandenong. And this man who had come across these remains was unrelated to the case, and he reportedly located the remains earlier, but it's alleged that he didn't actually realise that they were human remains before he placed them in a bin. And then it's unclear how, that's just so weird to me, but it's unclear how that happened, and he's done that, put them in a bin, and then the remains were found again and then identified the following day at the waste facility on November 19th. Yeah, I'm unclear on that, whether he said, I found these remains, but they weren't human or something. I don't know. But anyway, they were discovered and identified as human the following day on November the 19th at this waste facility in Dandenong. Now, once they had been tested, they were confirmed to be Isla's, and obviously this was a very horrifying time for the family. And then, of course, the police are looking to place charges. Now, following confirming that these are human remains and they're Isla's remains, police actually arrest Murat and they charge him with murder. And then Eyal, I just suck at this. We'll call him E. E was then charged with allegedly assisting after the fact, so that would be after murder, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Now, understandable, right? Because Murat has been like, yeah, I admit to knowing she was in a fridge and transporting her around and knowing she died in my apartment, but I didn't kill her. I don't know how she died. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then this other guy being like, yeah, well, I've assisted. Now, at the time, there's members of the public believing that the case looked pretty straightforward. Like, they found remains, they've got these two guys, right? But criminal courts are not governed by emotion or public opinion. And as we know, they're really quite difficult because not only are they governed by evidence, and that's, so they say they're governed by evidence, there have been many a case that have persecuted people over circumstantial evidence. But as this case progressed, there were a lot of issues in the forensics, and issues just kept popping up. Like, they were emerging left, right, and centre. Now, if we go into the forensic problems at the centre of this case, one of the biggest developments in this entire investigation actually came when they were doing the forensics examination of Isla's remains. Now, we have a forensic pathologist at the time who was doing this examination was Dr. De Boer, and Dr. De Boer reportedly told the court that Isla's remains were in an advanced state of decomposition. So you have to consider this has been about 6 weeks post-death and, post last sighting, but also she had been refrigerated for I'm unsure how long. But additionally, the remains had allegedly sustained major damage after passing through rubbish compactor machinery in the waste system. Now, Dr. De Boer also reportedly identified numerous injuries on Isla, including fractures to her skull and ribs, as well as multiple lacerations and superficial injuries. But here comes, issue number one in forensics. He couldn't actually conclude whether the injuries occurred before or after death, or when they occurred, or whether any of them were directly caused, whether any of the injuries directly caused her death. So the official cause of death was reportedly classified as unascertained, so uncertain, they can't confirm. And legally, this is hugely significant and throws a spanner in the works, because in a homicide prosecution, the prosecutors have to actually prove not only did Isla die, but they have to also prove that the accused, so Murat, unlawfully caused this death. And if the forensic experts can't establish a cause of death, then the reasonable doubt becomes a lot harder to overcome. And you have to remember, reasonable doubt is what we're working with. Do I agree with this? No, I don't. However, my opinion does not matter. The next issue comes with hearing the tox report, so the toxicology. Now, the court proceedings also heard that Isla had multiple substances in her system, including meth, MDMA, MDA, cannabis, cocaine metabolites, methadone, medications associated with ADHD, anxiety, depression, asthma, and sleeping disorders. Is this important? It's important to know to get an entire picture, but it doesn't, I don't think, look, I'll get to my opinion last. I'll shut up. Let me just go through the facts first. Now, Dr. DeBoer reportedly noted that there was no record of Isla actually participating in a methadone treatment program, and stated that methadone may potentially have been used and consumed by Isla as an off-label sedative. Then, of course, we have another forensic expert in the case because it was quite some time before, well, it wasn't quite some time, but 6 weeks before they found her remains and they needed assistance. So they called in a forensic anthropologist. And this anthropologist was Samantha Rowbotham. Rowbotham. And Samantha has reportedly told the court that she also could not determine an exact time of death after examining Isla's bones. Now, this occurs, and of course, defence argues back that could there be a possibility that Isla may have died from overdose or another cause unrelated to assault, and they've taken that and run with it because they've found substances in her system. So, anything that they could, that's what they're clinging to. Do I agree with it? No, I do not. Now, importantly, this doesn't mean that investigators believed no crime occurred, but what it did do is create major difficulties in proving the criminal responsibility, I guess, for homicide, and again, beyond reasonable doubt. And this is one of the harshest realities in forensic science because sometimes investigators strongly suspect what happened. Sometimes behaviour after a death appears deeply suspicious, but proving the exact medical mechanism of death is an entirely separate challenge. And this is where the case starts to shift in a negative direction because as this case progresses through the courts, prosecutors reassess the available evidence, and eventually the original murder charge against Murat was downgraded to manslaughter, and that decision alone suggested prosecutors may already have recognised difficulties proving intent or difficulties establishing a definitive mechanism of unlawful killing. But still, many believe the matter would proceed to trial, and then come now, May 2026, the case has taken another turn, which I was not expecting, and the Office of Public Prosecutions has withdrawn the manslaughter charge entirely, stating that, and let me quote, there were no reasonable prospects of conviction due to insufficient evidence. Pardon me, Christ on a bike. Instead, entirely here, the prosecutors indicated that Murat would face a lesser allegation, and are you ready for it? This is what they'll be allegedly charging him with. Attempting to pervert the course of justice. Are you kidding me? Now, the charges against E, which were attempting to pervert the course of justice, were also discontinued. And then, of course, outside the court, we have Isla's mother, Justine Spokes, and she's publicly expressing how devastated she is and how frustrated she is with the system. And it's incredibly sad because for grieving families, moments like this are impossible to process. And it's a massive letdown. Like, it's unreal. And why, you're probably thinking, why would they do this? Why would they drop a case? I'll tell you by the book why, but I completely disagree. Why would prosecutors abandon such serious charges? Now, the answer lies in the justice system, and within that, the answer lies within the burden of proof. And in Australia, I've gone through this a bit before, the criminal courts require prosecutors to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. So not suspicion, not probability, because the balance of probabilities is a civil matter, not public belief. It has to be beyond reasonable doubt. Now, prosecutors are ethically obligated not to proceed with charges if there's no reasonable prospect a jury would convict. That doesn't necessarily mean that they believe a person is innocent. It means that they do not believe the evidence available is legally strong enough to secure a conviction. I disagree, but this creates one of the most painful tensions in criminal justice, and it's something that it puts me in a blind rage. But some cases that can appear morally obvious to us aren't legally provable, and cases, not just Isla's, but other cases that involve advanced decomposition or contaminated remains or delayed in discovery, lots of things like this, post-mortem damage, that raises an issue. And Isla, there's several issues, but I think there's also several pieces of key evidence, which again, I'll get into in a minute. But I want to go into the broader context really quick about violence against women, because when I said earlier Isla had messaged her friend, it kind of insinuated, like she had messaged her friend when she was in the apartment saying she met this Russian man and he was buying her gifts and blah, blah, blah. And the media kind of portrayed it like insinuating that she maybe was a sex worker. And even if she was, who cares? Her life is equally as valuable as anyone else's. But I want to talk about that because after Isla's death, you've probably heard of the advocacy organisation She Matters. And post all of this happening in 2024, She Matters reportedly included Isla in a public rally which focused on violence against women and children in Australia. And that specific rally, it reportedly drew around 150 community members and displayed a 30-metre memorial listing which showed Australian women and children killed by violence since 2008. And just really quick, I want to tell you some of those stats because according to these figures, and I had a check of this in May 2026, 24 women and children had allegedly already been lost to homicide in Australia during 2026 alone, and at least 169 Australian women reportedly been killed by violence between the 1st of January 24 and the 22nd of April 26. That's more than 2,500 women and children reportedly being killed by violence in Australia since 2015. Now, Isla's case specifically highlighted a lot, but it's a lot about background and disclosure and history and the way that, I guess, there's so much focus placed on the aspects of Isla's personal life while comparatively, where's the attention being directed towards the alleged offender's background? Like, that's what we should be concerned about, right? Cases like this sit in a deeply uncomfortable space because there's a difference between what people emotionally believe happened and what the legal system can conclusively prove. And that gap it's shit for us to watch and listen, but for the families going through it, it's unbearable. And particularly when we have a case like this where, again, I'll get into it, but it's suspicious. And yeah, the allegations in this case feel impossible to separate from questions of accountability, but criminal courts are intentionally designed to operate cautiously, and that burden of proof exists to prevent wrongful convictions, but sometimes it's another kick in the guts, really, to have no justice. Like, what happens when a death appears suspicious but forensic science can't prove definitively that there's answers? Is this what is going to happen? Is this going to really be the result? Is this what Isla's worth is? Dropping charges like this because you feel that you're not going to win in a court of law. I just don't agree. And I'm going to get into my personal part here because this really frustrates me a lot because, as always, first of all, I want to make it clear that this next little ranty section is my opinion and commentary only. and just based off how I feel about it and nothing more or less. But speaking personally, I think this is where so many members of the public are struggling with this case, and you might not have been, but you might be now that you know about it, because saying prosecutors can't conclusively prove whether Isla died from homicide or overdose is one thing, which, by the way, side note, I already have a very strong opinion on whether this was homicide or overdose due to the evidence being presented, but I'll come back. But many people look at the totality of the allegations and then they ask how there is allegedly not enough evidence for any homicide prosecution to proceed at all. Talk to me. The CCTV allegations. The allegation Isla entered the apartment. Think about it. There's footage of her entering the apartment, and there's no footage of her ever leaving. That's alleged. There's alleged assault footage in that apartment. That is the last place she was seen alive. And in that alleged footage of the alleged assault of Isla is Murat allegedly causing the assault, allegedly the offender in his own apartment. And then the allegation that her body was concealed in a fridge in that apartment, in his apartment. And he accepted this to be true. He said, yes, she was stored in a fridge. Her dead body was in a fridge in my apartment. And that is the last place she was seen alive. I'm so sorry. What is that if that's not evidence? The alleged extensive cleaning of the apartment afterwards, allegedly captured on CCTV. The admission that Isla died in his apartment before her remains were allegedly moved. Those are not isolated circumstances. What about the 6 weeks of knowing that you were holding on to human remains and you disposed of them? What about that? They're pieces of a timeline that appear to connect together through very logical inference. I don't always like to draw inference. This is very logical inference. She was last seen in an apartment. She was allegedly caught on CCTV going into that apartment and being assaulted in that apartment. The apartment belonged to Murat. In that alleged footage, it was Murat assaulting her in that apartment. Murat goes on to admit her dead body was in his apartment. Far out, man. This is where there's that divide between legal sufficiency and public perception. Because prosecutors aren't asking, does this look suspicious? Can we infer this? They're obviously having to ask, can we prove beyond reasonable doubt exactly how Isla died? And can we prove unlawful causation to the criminal standard required for homicide? Now, legally, those are two very different questions, but emotionally, contextually, think about that. Because I think if this was seen before a jury, I think they would succeed. I very rarely have faith in a jury, and I think, if you've listened to my episodes up to now, you would know how I feel about that. I think a judge should definitely make that ruling. But I think in this case, specifically, if it was seen and tried before a jury, I do think that they would draw reasonable inference here. This is absolutely black and white to me. I can't understand it. I don't agree with it. And now for Isla's family, there's no legal explanation to undo this loss, and there's no justice. And there's also no justice for the community where these men live. There is a risk to society. There's a risk to women. And I hate that this case has very quickly become another example of failure in our country, to be honest. It makes me feel sick. And, when I saw this happen, it made me ill. I just felt so sick because she doesn't deserve this. And, we can't allow this. And I think we need to really rally around Isla's family and try and help seek justice. That's all I've got for you today for No Justice for Isla Bell. I'm very sad that this is a no justice episode. I hope that does change in the future. While I have you, we have 2 episodes coming up that I'm going to release with our special guest, Chris Darcy, who is, of course, the president of Search Dogs Sydney. I was lucky enough to have a really good chat with Chris, and I came away from that learning a lot, actually. And I shocked myself and everyone else, really, by how much I learnt in that chat with Chris. It was very informative. I really enjoyed it, and it was quite extensive. We also, well, by we, I mean, I think just me, had technology problems during this interview. So I have split it. I wasn't going to split it into 2, but when I realised how long it went for all up, it would have been about a 2-hour episode. And I thought, no, I'll do part 1 and part 2. So the technology issue ended up working out quite well. I intended to release both of those this week, but I'll release just part 1 first because of, the incidences earlier in the week. But I'm going to run and love and leave you and go and cuddle my babies and work on piecing together a few other bits and pieces for you for Gus Lamont part 2. Thank you so much again, guys, for joining me today, and not just for that, but for sticking with me. I know we're not, as big or as grand as many other podcasts out there, but what we can confidently say is I think we absolutely have the best listeners. I don't think that any other podcast has such a good following. You guys are the best. The amount of messages that you guys send, like offering your help, is amazing. And I say it every week when I'm here that I love you guys so much. It's really cool because we are discussing some really shitty things 99% of the time, with some really shit people doing some really crappy things in life. And it's comforting to know that there's actually better people out there tenfold than there are these shit people who kind of engage with this sort of thing and get away with this sort of thing like we're talking about today. But I am actually unsure if there is a social media page for Isla Bell. I'm going to look into that. If you are aware, please let us know. But I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. You can subscribe to support us on Facebook. It's $1.49 per month. Otherwise, if you could maybe have a look and share our GoFundMe to help us get our operational boots on the ground in Queensland to help Jack McLennan's family, that would be incredible. Otherwise, just having a discussion with your friends and family about crime prevention, safety, looking out for each other, being a good person, always trying to make, and in being a good person, I don't mean being the best person on earth. I mean always trying to make the best decision with what you have in that time. And that's the best that we can do. Sometimes we are put in shitty situations, but always thinking, hey, this is going to have a better outcome for me and those around me, makes the world a better place. So thank you so much, and thanks for listening to me waffle. It has felt a lot like a bit of a counselling session today, and one that I really needed. So thank you kindly. Follow along across all of our social media platforms. And that's what I forgot to say. I have created some forms which are super easily accessible now on our Facebook page if you had a case request that you wanted on the podcast, or if you are a family or friend of a loved one who would like an episode for them as well. There's 2 separate forms. So you can fill those out and I will get straight to it. Have a beautiful day. Bye, guys.